I'm honored to be in your presence, and I'm going to get to talk to you all today about finding diversity within each of us, okay? So often when we talk about diversity, we're thinking of what are we telling people to do, right? It's very like instructional. Who's doing it well? Who's not doing it well? What are we going to do? And today, we're going to take a break from that. Today, we're going to focus on ourselves. We're going to start within. And I like to think of diversity kind of like a rainbow baby. And it's possible because I'm a rainbow baby, so everything's about me, right? That's how I see it that way. But there's a level of loss and there's a level of hope with it, right? Usually it comes from something that we've lost. And then from that loss, we build on something with a hope. And so that's how I like to look at diversity. Of course, we've seen definitions already. And so one way I like to look at it as diversity really refers to differences. And if you look at it that way, it wouldn't be limited to the 7 categories you just saw up there, but it's really something within all of us. And I like to think of it as us looking within for our special strangers and finding and embracing those special strangers. Because if we don't accept and acknowledge the stranger within us, it's going to get in the way of what we're going to be able to do as far as embracing others. And we all know with the diversity journey, there has to be something there for us to embrace in ourselves and others. So, I want you guys to do this with me. I promise you I'm not going to take you anywhere crazy, no hypnosis. But if you are comfortable, close your eyes for me. And right now, I want you to imagine a time when you didn't feel like you belonged. Silence the skeptic. I don't care if it was objective, reasonable, or not. Think of a time when you didn't feel you belonged. Where were you? Who else was with you? In that moment, what loss did you experience? What did you hope was different? What did you feel? Open your eyes. Thank you for going on this journey with me. You guys are brave. What did you feel? Did anybody feel loved and accepted in that moment? Right? Anybody feel included in that moment? Okay, stick with me, keep that feeling. I think that day, whatever that experience was, whatever that story, that was one of those days when you found a stranger within you. Something about you was different, it didn't fit in. Something about you didn't click for wherever you were, and there was a stranger within you that you recognized that day. Now, we take that stranger with us everywhere we go. Think of the stranger as the asterisk in the little box to the left, right? But we act differently depending on where we are. So when we're in inclusive spaces, in more inclusive spaces, we have so much going on, right, with the people in those spaces that we never really have to focus on, man, am I different, right? For example, in my family, I am an extrovert of 4 children. And everybody else is an introvert. But if you saw me with my siblings, you would never tell because we're having such a blast. The last thing I'm thinking about is, hey, I'm different. These guys are weird, right? And so that's where we go. When the stranger's within us in inclusive spaces, we don't have to really focus on that stranger within. However, when we're in less inclusive spaces, all we can see would be the differences. Right? Now all of a sudden it's like, were they born in America or were they born in Liberia, you know? Are they speaking English like Liberian English or American English? British English or American English, right? Cuisine, art, all of these things now, it's kind of like, wait a minute, we don't have a commonality anymore we're working from. And most of the times, we're never really in fully inclusive or fully maybe less inclusive spaces, right? Most of the time, we are in spaces where there's some level of diversity, right? Because remember I said, we're not limiting diversity to 7 categories. So wherever we are, there's some level of diversity there. So what happens there? We have some diversity dilemmas. And I want to talk with us about this. If you haven't experienced any of these yet, that's okay. Now you're going to be better prepared when they do happen. And if you have, maybe you can think back and think what could have gone differently, right, when you have those experiences. The first one I like to talk about is fear versus curiosity, right? Listen, guys, don't ever start with fear. I'm just going to put it out there. Because there's nowhere to go but downhill when you start with fear. And unless you really enjoy being anxious and worried and like just, like paranoid about life, don't start with fear. But start with curiosity, right? Start with this idea of what is it that I can learn? Now, you could find out at the end of the day, maybe fear was really evidently somewhere I should have been. But starting from curiosity gives you something to talk about. And one of the things I like to do is when I meet new people, I think to myself, when I leave this conversation, there are going to be 3 things I learned about this person that I have in common with this person. Right? And they can be random. For example, I met Sunyu's mom. And I've been to Ithaca, which is where she's from, right? And she lived in Rhode Island for a period of time, and I have family in Rhode Island. And she doesn't like traveling as much as I like traveling, right? So we had some talks about some of that. I had never met that lady before today. We probably didn't even talk for 5 minutes. But like every conversation, that's a tip. If you're curious, you're gonna find something there that connects them back to you. And that's where we wanna go. Then, that's for meeting people, and people's nice. But sometimes we have to think about how we are with change. Because generally speaking, a lot of us are kind of like, we're either going to be more like, let's go in and stay with the in-group, let's not ruffle any feathers, or we're going to be more along the lines of, I don't mind standing up if this is the right thing to do. And so when it comes to change, we need to be aware, where are we leaning? Are we leaning where, it's comfortable? Are we blending? Or are we willing to be the unicorn and stand out? Nostalgia versus cynicism. And I think I should have used skepticism. Maybe that would have been the proper word for today, right? But I love this. And this is just kind of like a little race and ethnicity across the decades that you can see. And you can see at different times it looks simpler than it looked in 2020, which is the last one on the line, right? And I love nostalgia. I don't care what anybody says, right? I grew up in Liberia during the Civil War. And one of my favorite memories is, and I'll say to people, it was really hard, but there were times I loved spending time with my parents. We were able to bond, and it was just wonderful being with my brother and my parents, playing cards, playing Scrabble. And most people will look at me and be like, you were in a war. Like fun, exciting bonding should not be things you should say about that, right? And I could easily say everybody had that experience. But the reality is there were kids my age who were separated from their parents and never knew whether they would see their parents again. So whenever we're in this nostalgia, we need to understand that, number one, our norm is not the norm. It's just that simple, right? Just because this is how we see things, this is our experience, doesn't mean our experience is universal. Principles versus people. All right, I have a fun story. So when COVID happened, in our family, we were very afraid, very, 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 very afraid. And so we were very, very careful. And so came a point where we wanted to see some of our friends. And everything we believed, let's just say they believed everything the opposite end of it, right? But we hadn't seen them and we missed them. And we really wanted to see them. So we said, okay, we're going to meet you guys. We're going to be around this weekend. Let's, plan a meeting. Well, of course, I'm petrified, right? Because I'm like, who knows what COVID we're going to catch this weekend, And we've been doing so well all this time, and now we're going there. To my, amazement, my friends, one of my friends texts us, and she goes, okay, so are we going to do something outside? Or if you come in the house, we'll wear masks. They never wore masks. Unless like a store required them to enter, they never wore masks. And imagine how I felt in that moment, that they would put their principles to the side to care for us in the way that they wouldn't normally have done. And so I want us to just keep this in mind. Principles are going to be costly. If your principles are more important than people, it's going to be costly. It's easier to serve a position. Think of a position as a dot on the page. Easy to serve your position. And if everybody puts their dot on that page and serves that, easy. But we all go nowhere. There's a lot of loss compared to hope in situations like that where we're all putting our spots and claiming our stakes. And at the end of the day, you guys are going to be healers here, right? Can principals cure anybody? Do they go to medical school? Do principals go to medical school and treat people? No. So if you have a choice, pick people. Yeah, it's going to be harder to serve people because relationships take time, right? And people are difficult. Let's be real. But there's more hope in that than loss. And at the end of the day, there's comfort and cure you could get from people that you can't get from principles. Last one I want us to take a look at is this, perception versus reality. So, pandemic again. I got a Facebook message from a friend I went to high school with. And in a message, obviously, she says this. And I agree with my friend on it being hard to hear about white privilege, right? I agree. And even a broken clock is right twice a day. So we have to be careful that we find people and something we can work with, okay? I agree with that line. Now, let me put it this way. We live in America, and there's certainly American privileges. Not many other places in the world could I have come as a Liberian refugee and become a banker and then a lawyer. Who knows? Next, I'll be a hairdresser. I'm working on that. But you know what I mean? Nowhere else probably could I have done what I've done here. So there's American privilege. And just because there's a color yellow doesn't mean there's not a color blue and green and purple, right? Now, she is concerned about who's talking about white privilege, okay? And one of the things this was hard to read, it was hard to receive, was because my friend and I went to the same high school. Arguably, me, immigrant, she's not. She had a lot of opportunities. She made choices, I think equally honorable choices, but they probably provided less, they did provide less money, privilege, and prestige perhaps, right? But she made a choice, right? No one stopped her. I certainly didn't stop her from any of these careers or these options, right? But she has a problem with it coming from people like me. The other thing I don't like about this is that it almost insinuates, listen, you've arrived, sit down and shut up, because if anything existed, right, that would have prohibited your coming here, you wouldn't have been here. And I genuinely believe that's something we have to be cautious about in terms of reality. Because getting to places like I've gotten, and certainly I wouldn't put myself in the success category significantly yet, right? We'll deal with some other things later. But, but certainly, right, when you think about it, when I walk into a store and I'm accused of shoplifting, and I'm never like this, of course, right? I don't identify as a lawyer everywhere I go. I just don't, because people will hate me, and I wouldn't want to be hated. But when I go into a store, there are issues there. People may accuse me of wanting to shoplift for something as simple as a $5 item that certainly I wouldn't walk away stealing and lose my law license over. When Serena Williams, with all the money, privilege, and prestige, had her baby, healthcare issues she had, people wouldn't listen to her. We all as Black women probably have stories like that where we haven't been heard by medical professionals. No amount of money, privilege, and prestige can protect us where we're most vulnerable. And so we have to be careful that while we may have our perceptions, we need to validate them to the extent that they can be validated, or we need to understand that reality may actually go contrary to what those perceptions are, and we have to be open to that. So what do we do now, right? You all have found your strangers. You can't tell me you don't know that person. It's there. And we all know their dilemmas we're going to face, because that's life. We have these choices to make. But where do we go now? I genuinely believe there's hope in all of us. Genuinely. And I think it starts with us accepting our own differences, because that's the first step. When we do that, then we have more empathy for people who may be on different paths, different points in their journey. You know, do I think my friend is someone who is where I am from a diversity perspective? Probably not, but that doesn't mean she won't get there, you know? And instead of replying her, I was not nice, I thought, God, help her children marry Black people, which isn't good, because that wasn't nice. So the point is, people will be on their journey, and we'll have more empathy for them if we know and we've done the work ourselves. At that point, then, we can begin to embrace others, because we can't get what we don't have. We just can't. And the last thing is come in peace. Now, I know, hear me out. You see what I say there? Acceptance doesn't mean agreement. Just take a deep breath and listen, hear me out. Almost 18 years ago, my husband and I walked down the aisle to get married. When we took our vows, do you think we said, I will agree with everything that other one wants for the rest of my life? No, we just agreed to accept them as spouses. He agreed to accept me, unfortunately for him. I agreed to accept him, fortunately for me. I got the winning on the bargain there, right? But that's what we need to come to. If we come in peace as we meet strangers, as we meet people who we're not familiar with, that's when we realize how hopeful this journey can be. And that's when we realize that even when we disagree, like my friends and I did, we can still love each other where they are. And I hope for each of you that you find that. You find that in life, and you find that in your profession, because the work we have to do is so meaningful, we cannot afford to not do the work and start doing the good we need to do. And I thank you for your time.